Good morning, friends. Dan Phelps here, coming to you earlier than I should to teach you about mapping the fretboard of the guitar and playing with more freedom up and down the neck. Last week, I talked about using octaves to quickly find any note on the fretboard, how to find the same note on all 6 strings. Go back and check out that video if you haven't seen it. It's a good foundation for what we're getting into now. This week, we're going to talk about mapping the major scale in any key across the fretboard and figuring out how to play a major scale anywhere on the neck, up and down each string. This is going to be kind of a powerful beginning, a foundational piece of putting together playing in different keys, finding chords on the fretboard, and just generally knowing your way around a guitar. So to begin with, let's talk about the formula of the major scale. Grab a piece of paper and get ready to write this down. First, write down the numbers 1 through 7. We do that because there are 7 notes in the major scale, and they can be represented by the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Leave a little space between each one of those numbers, because we're going to write an interval between each one of those that tells us how far to travel between each one of those notes. It's going to either be a whole step or a half step, so you could write an H for half step and a W for whole step. So between the 1 and the 2, write a W. Between the 2 and the 3, write a W. Between the 4 and the 5, between the 3 and the 4, write an H. Between the 4 and the 5, write a W. Between the 5 and the 6, write a W. Between the 6 and the 7, write a W. And between just after the 7, write an H. So you're going to end up with something that looks kind of like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And this sequence of intervals. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. That's the formula for a major scale. So how would you lay that out on the fretboard? Well, an easy way to see that to begin with is just to play it up 1 string at a time. So let's say in the key of G, starting at the 3rd fret on the low E string, if I follow this series of intervals, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, that's going to generate a G major scale for me if I consider this to be 1. So that's 7 notes. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And the half step between 7 and the next note brings us back around to the beginning of the formula. Now we're back at 1 again. Whole, so 1, whole, whole, whole. If I could keep going, I could play a G major further up this string, but I run out of frets. So you can use this as a starting point to generate a major scale from any note anywhere on the guitar. If you could pick E at the 2nd fret on the D string, you can follow this formula of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half to play an E major scale. Follow so far? And so the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 also correlate to the name of the note or the scale degree that you would be playing. So 1 can also be called the root. That could also be represented by the letter R. 2, that's the 2nd of the scale. 3 is the 3rd. So when someone says major 3rd, that's the note that they're talking about. 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we repeat again. 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. So I think you can see how this allows you to map a scale from any starting point on any string, and voila, you're playing the major scale up and down each string of the guitar. How do you tie this together into a more holistic view where you're not just playing 1 string at a time on the guitar? Well, the cool thing is you can start this formula from any one of the notes and follow it, and it will generate the scale for you. So for instance, let's say we're in the key of G and our root is here at the 3rd fret on the E string. Now if I start from this G and follow the formula up, I know it'll give me a major scale on the E string. Now let's start it from here. So A is the 2nd note of the G major scale, 1, 2. And so we can play A at the 5th fret on the E string, or we can play the open A string. So if we start at 2 in the formula, since 2 is going to be A, we can follow the formula from there. Whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. Now we're playing G major, but on the A string. So we've got it on the E string, we've got it on the A string. We can do the same thing on the D string. If I were to go in here and write the actual note names of the G major scale, bear with me, above each one of these numbers, we'd have G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. Would look something like this. Follow me, everybody? So let's say then that we wanted to play a G major scale all the way up the D string. Well, we would start with D, which, as we can tell from our handy dandy little formula, is the 5th scale degree. So if we start from here, we can play G major all the way up the neck. So I would follow the formula from there. So that's the 5. So whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step. There we go. Now we know if you were to draw out the guitar neck and write that down for those bottom 3 strings, you would have all of the notes of G major on the low E, A, and D strings, and you could do the same thing for each of the other strings of the guitar. The open G string is going to be pretty obvious. You just start this formula from 1 and follow it all the way up. The B string, open B, is the 3rd scale degree of G major, so you could start the formula from there. And the E string is just a duplicate of the low E string. So if you were to draw out the fretboard, 6 vertical lines and several cross hatches relating to the frets of the guitar, and put a dot for each place where you can play one of the notes of G major, you would end up with all of the notes of G major across the entire guitar. And that is how you would figure out how to play any key, major scales in any key, using this simple formula. So what I would encourage you to do, grab your guitar, sit down, and start feeling your way through this. I mean, put this right in front of you so you can reference it, and just pick somewhere on the guitar to start. You could say, I'm going to start with the B at the 4th fret on the G string, and I'm going to start playing the major scale up from there using this formula. I like to play over a drone because it gives me sort of a sonic reference, a pitch reference of what I'm playing means over top of a chord. It just kind of gets the actual feeling and vibe of each scale note into my psyche more than just playing it naked and unaccompanied. But I would sit down and start exploring this up and down each string, and then also try to do it on adjacent strings. Mess around with playing G major on the D and the G strings of the guitar right here in the middle, and getting a feel for how the scale maps up each one of these strings, starting from different scale points. So hopefully this has been insightful for you. Trust me that when I say that this is worth digging into, if this is a little beyond where you are right now, that's okay. You might have to do a couple of scrapes of layers in order to get to the point where this locks in your brain, but this is the beginning of being able to put together solos, chord changes, knowing all the chords of any key across the whole fretboard, and really giving yourself a map of where you can go. The difference between traveling in uncharted country and having a map of where you're headed, and kind of a jumping off point for anything that you want to do. Almost everything in music relates back to the major scale. When we talk about chord names, when we talk about other scales, unusual scales, they're often represented as a modification of something from the major scale. So this is the foundational piece for learning to play the guitar and know your way all around this slightly wacky instrument. If you have any questions, feel free to send me an email at danphelps.com. Comment below. I'll put the links for anything you need in the show notes below, and I hope this has been a good lesson. I've enjoyed giving it, so have a great time, and I'll see you later.